Welcome in. Settle into wherever you are right now, soften your shoulders, and let your eyes get heavy whenever they want to. Pull the blanket a little higher if it helps, dim the light, and let the room grow quiet around you. Tonight I have a handful of slow, gentle stories to keep you company. There is nothing to follow, nothing to figure out, and nothing waiting at the end. Just little scenes to drift through until sleep finds you. The first one is about a train. A few summers ago, I took a long, slow train north, the kind that does not really care how long it takes to arrive. It stopped at every small station, even the ones that seemed to be nothing more than a wooden bench and a tin sign nodding in the breeze. I had picked it on purpose. I had a whole week off, nowhere I needed to be, and I wanted to watch the country roll by at a speed I could actually look at. So I boarded in the late afternoon with a soft canvas bag, a paperback I had read twice already, a thermos of tea, and the half-tired feeling you get when a long journey is just beginning and you do not have to do anything for a while. The carriage smelled faintly of warm dust and old fabric. The seats were the wide green kind with a little headrest that always sits slightly too low. I picked one by the window on the side that would be facing east when the sun came up in the morning, and I unpacked in the small, careful way that travelers do, lining up the thermos, the book, a folded sweater, a tin of peppermints, until the little tray table looked like a tidy desk. The conductor came through with a punch and a tired smile, marked my ticket, and told me there was hot water at the front of the car. Then he wandered off, swaying gently with the floor, humming something I could not quite catch. The train pulled out of the city in the slow way that trains do, with a long, low groan and a steady rocking that you feel before you hear it. The buildings thinned out almost at once. First the brick warehouses and the back ends of factories, then the rows of small houses with their laundry lines, and then, all at once, fields. The country opened up like a book being laid flat. I watched a man on a tractor finish a row of dark earth in the last light of the day. He did not look up. The crows behind him hopped lazily, picking at whatever the tractor had turned over. For a long time, I just sat there. I did not read, did not look at my phone, did not even drink my tea. I watched the light go soft. The fields turned gold, then a kind of muted pink, and the shadows of the fence posts stretched out across the grass like long, thin fingers. Every now and then we passed a small house with one warm window lit up, and I would think for a moment about the person inside, what they might be cooking, what kind of evening they were having. Then the train would carry me past, and I would imagine someone else. After a while, I went up to the dining car. It was almost empty. There was a small wooden bar at one end and 4 little tables with red lamps that flickered very softly. A man in a white apron was wiping down a counter with the patient, circular motion of someone who is not in a hurry. I ordered a bowl of soup and a slice of brown bread and a glass of weak tea. He nodded as if he had been expecting me. While I waited, I leaned my forehead against the window and watched the dark shapes of trees go by. I could see my own reflection there too, soft and a little blurry, like someone in a quiet painting. There was an older couple at the table across from me. They were sharing a piece of cake, taking very small forkfuls in turn, and not really talking. Now and then they would look at each other and smile a little, as if they were inside a private joke that did not need any words. When the woman caught my eye, she gave me a small nod, the way strangers do on long journeys. The man poured me a little of their pot of tea without asking, just lifted the lid in a question, and I held out my cup, and that was that. By the time I went back to my seat, full of soup and a little drowsy, the world outside had gone properly dark. Now and then a small town would slide by, all soft yellow lamps and quiet streets, but mostly there was just the steady black of fields and the occasional outline of a hill against a faintly purple sky. The rhythm of the wheels under the floor settled into a steady, soft pattern, 2 clicks and a pause, 2 clicks and a pause. It was like a slow heartbeat under everything. The conductor came back through and showed me how to fold the seat into a bunk. He had the slow, careful manner of someone who has done a thing 10,000 times and still pays attention. He showed me the little reading lamp, the hook for my bag, the latch on the privacy curtain. He even pointed out the spot where I should put my shoes so I would not knock them over in the dark. Then he wished me a good rest and slid the curtain shut, and I was alone in a small, soft cave of my own, rocking gently above the rails. I lay down with my book open on my chest, but I did not read more than a few lines. The light on the page kept slipping out of focus. The blanket was warm in that scratchy, friendly way that train blankets are. Every now and then the train would slow and stop at some tiny platform, and I would hear the soft hiss of brakes, a door open and close, a single set of footsteps moving away into the night. Then a low whistle, and the gentle, patient lurch of the train starting up again. After a while, I stopped tracking the stops at all. I just let the rocking carry me, and somewhere between two clicks of the wheels, I fell asleep without meaning to. I half woke up once in the deep middle of the night. The train was sitting still at some unknown station. I could hear the soft thrum of an engine somewhere far down the platform, and the muffled voices of two railway workers talking about nothing important, the way people talk in small dark hours when no one is in a hurry. I lifted the corner of the curtain and saw a single lamp throwing a circle of warm yellow on a wet platform, with a porter slowly wheeling a small wooden trolley toward a door. Then a low whistle and the gentle pull of the train starting up once more. I let the curtain fall, turned over, and let the soft rocking take me again. I do not remember dreaming. I just remember the warmth and the steady, kindly motion and the long, unhurried sound of the wheels under everything. When I woke up, the world was full of fog. The window was beaded with cool drops, and beyond them, a soft white nothing. I lay there for a long time just watching it, listening to the steady murmur of the train. Slowly, the fog began to thin. Trees appeared, dark and damp. Then a low stone wall. Then a field of sheep, gray and woolly, lifting their heads as we passed. The sky was a pale, soft blue, the kind of blue that has no opinion about anything yet. The sun was somewhere up there, behind a thin sheet of cloud, more idea than light. I went back to the dining car for breakfast. The same man in the white apron was there. He had a small pot of coffee on a hot plate, and he poured me a cup without asking. He had a soft pastry too, the kind with a little fold of jam at the center, and I ate it slowly while the country rolled by. By now there were hills, real ones, low and green and dotted with white rocks. We crossed a river on a long old bridge that made the train sound different, hollow and metallic, just for a few seconds. Then we were back on solid earth, slipping past more fields, more sheep, more small farms with smoke rising slow and straight from their chimneys. We came into a little station sometime mid-morning. It was nothing much, just a wooden platform, a tiny stone building with a clock above the door, and a single bench under a tin roof. But beyond it, through a gap in the hedges, I could see a lake. It was the kind of lake that does not move. A flat sheet of silver, with mountains stacked behind it like layers of soft gray paper. I checked my ticket, which I had been forgetting on purpose, and saw that this was my stop. I gathered my bag, said thank you to the conductor, who tipped his cap and stepped down onto the platform. The air was cool and full of the smell of damp grass and wood smoke. The train sat there for a minute, breathing, while the conductor walked the length of it. Then he stepped back on board, the whistle gave a single low note, and the train rolled gently away into the green. I stood there until it was just a thin line in the distance, and then a soft hum, and then nothing at all. The silence after a train leaves is a special kind of silence. It is not really silent. There are birds, and somewhere a sheep, and the small soft sound of water touching reeds. But it is the silence of being able to hear all of those things. I picked up my bag and walked through the little gap in the hedge, down a path of crushed white stones, toward the lake. The path bent through a small meadow where the grass was still wet from the night. My shoes made soft, dark prints behind me. There were little blue flowers I did not know the name of, scattered through the green like spilled bits of sky. A bumblebee bumped slowly along, all velvet and warm in no hurry to get anywhere either. I stopped at one point just to watch it, the way it would land, take a moment, lift off, drift to the next blue dot. It was such a small thing, but in the soft morning quiet, it seemed like the only thing happening in the world. At the edge of the lake, there was a low wooden jetty, gray and patient, with a single rowing boat tied to the end. The water there was clearer than I had expected. I could see small stones on the bottom and the slow brown shapes of fish moving in their unhurried way. A duck came around the corner of the reeds, looked at me with mild interest, and decided I was not worth worrying about. She paddled on, 3 small ducklings strung out behind her in a wobbly line. I sat down on the end of the jetty and just looked. There was nothing especially dramatic about that lake. It was not the biggest, it was not the bluest, it was not famous for anything. But sitting there with my bag beside me and the rowing boat creaking softly against the wood, I felt the kind of quiet you only really feel when you have given up trying to be somewhere else. The train was long gone. The day was just beginning. I had nothing to read, nothing to write, nothing to prove, nothing to fix. The week was a wide, slow thing, and I was already inside it. A man came down the path after a while with a small dog. He nodded the way people in quiet places nod, which is to say, he barely moved his head and meant it kindly. The dog sniffed my bag, decided it was friendly, and sat down to scratch one ear with a slow leg. The man asked, in the way locals ask without really wanting much of an answer, whether I had come in on the morning train. I said I had. He nodded again, looked out at the lake, and said it was a good morning for it. Then he and the dog walked on around the shore, and I watched them get smaller and smaller, until they were just 2 soft shapes among the reeds. I lay back on the wood of the jetty, with my bag under my head, and I closed my eyes for a while. I did not really sleep. I just listened. The little slap of water against the boat, the breath of wind moving through the leaves up the hill. A small bird somewhere, calling a slow 2-note song over and over. The train had carried me all the long way north, through fields and fog and morning hills, and had set me down at the edge of all this quiet, and now there was nothing in the world to do but be there. So I just stayed. My grandmother used to say that the kitchen knows you before you wake up. She meant that if you bake often enough, your body will start moving before your mind catches on, and the kitchen will quietly help you out. I did not really understand that until I retired and started making bread on Saturdays. Now I do. I wake up just before 5 most weekends. There is no alarm. The light through the curtain is still that soft gray that does not really have a color yet. The house is cool. The cat, who has been sleeping in the curve of my knees, stretches, yawns at me without opening her eyes, and then settles back into the same warm spot. I leave her there. I put on my soft old robe, the one with the loose tie, and walk down to the kitchen in slippers. The wooden floorboards make their quiet, familiar sounds. There is no need to turn on any big lights. I just flick the small lamp over the sink, the one that throws a warm yellow circle onto the counter. Outside, the garden is still asleep. A blackbird is starting to think about singing, but he is not committed yet. The first thing I do is fill the kettle. The water from our tap is soft and cold, and it makes a low, steady sound when it falls into the kettle. While it heats up, I take the jar of flour down from the shelf. It is a big glass jar with a metal clip lid, and it sits next to the salt, the sugar, the dried beans, all in their own tidy jars. I keep them on a shelf my husband built me 30 years ago, before he passed. The wood is dark now from old steam and a little bit of butter, and the shelf is still perfectly level. He was careful that way. The bread I make most weekends is a simple one. Flour, water, salt, a small spoon of yeast. That is all. Nothing fancy. I used to try complicated breads when I was younger, breads with twists and seeds and shiny tops, but somewhere along the way I came back to the plain one. There is something honest about it. You cannot hide behind anything. If you do not pay attention, it tells you. I pour the flour into a big yellow bowl that used to be my mother's. It has a small chip on the rim near the handle where I dropped it on the tile floor in 1986. I remember being so upset I cried, even though I was a grown woman with a job and a mortgage. My mother just laughed and said the chip would make it a real bowl, not a museum piece. She was right. The chip is still there. The bowl is still here. I am still using it. I mix the salt into the flour with my fingers slowly. The flour is cool and silky and squeaks just a little when I press it. Then I make a small well in the middle and pour in the warm water. The yeast goes in next, a small soft snow of it, scattered over the surface of the water. It starts to dissolve almost at once in lazy, slow swirls. I stand and watch it for a moment. There is no rush. There is never any rush with bread. When the kettle clicks off behind me, I make a small pot of tea. I use the brown teapot, the squat one that pours well. While the tea steeps, I bring the flour and water together with my fingers, gently, like I am combining two friends who have not met yet. The dough is shaggy at first, with little dry tufts at the edge of the bowl. I keep working it, slow and patient, until it comes together into a soft, sticky, slightly imperfect ball. Then I cover the bowl with a clean cloth, set it on the warm corner of the counter near the radiator, and leave it alone. The bread does not need me for the next hour, so I make myself useful in other small ways. I pour my tea. I sit at the kitchen table by the window and watch the garden slowly come awake. The blackbird finally gets going, and he is good, a long fluting song. A robin lands on the fence and turns his head this way and that. My neighbor's tabby trots along the top of the wall on her morning patrol. I drink my tea in slow sips and let the warmth move through me. After a while, I get up and putter. I wipe the counter. I sweep a few crumbs off the floor. I look out the window at the rose bush my husband planted the year we moved in. It is old and a little tired now, but it still flowers every June in big soft pink blooms that smell like nothing else. I water the herb pots on the windowsill, the basil and the mint and the small thyme, and pick a leaf of mint just to crush it between my fingers and smell it. It wakes my hands up. I open the back door for a minute and stand in it. The air is cool and a little green. The birds are properly busy now, not just the blackbird but a whole soft chorus of them, doing their morning paperwork in the hedges. A squirrel comes around the corner of the shed, sees me, freezes, then carries on as if I had given him permission. The neighbor's cat is sitting on the wall again, slowly washing one paw with great care. I think about how, when I was younger and working, I would have spent this hour answering emails or rushing through breakfast. Now I get to stand in the back door and watch a cat wash her paw. It seems a fair trade. I close the door eventually, only because the dough is calling. Not really. The dough is doing what it does at its own slow pace, which is precisely what it should be doing. But I check on it anyway. I lift the corner of the cloth just to peek. The dough has begun to puff. It is a little stretched against the side of the bowl. I lower the cloth and leave it to its private business. I go back to the kitchen table with my cup. The sun has crept a little further across the floor. The corner of the table where I always sit is now warm to the touch. I rest my hand on it for a moment, the way you might rest a hand on the back of a sleeping animal. Outside, a small wind has come up. It moves the leaves of the lilac by the kitchen window, gently, just enough to send little shifting patches of light onto the wall above the radiator. I sit and look at the light moving on the wall for a long time. There is no thinking happening. There is just looking. It is a very nice way to spend a morning, and I do not understand why I did not know that for the first 60 years of my life. I get up after a while to look at the rose bush from the inside window too, because looking at the rose bush is one of the small, kind things I do for myself. From inside the kitchen, the rose looks softer than it does outside. The light goes through the petals and makes them glow. A small bee is working it over, methodical, unhurried, going from bloom to bloom in the order they seem to deserve. When I lift the cloth off the bowl, the dough has roughly doubled. It has that puffy, alive look that always makes me smile, like it has been quietly busy while I was not looking. I turn it out onto a lightly floured board. It sighs as it lands, a little soft sigh, releasing some of its breath. I shape it with my hands, folding it over itself a few times, the way you might fold a blanket. Then I gather it into a round, tuck the seam under, and lay it gently into a small basket lined with a flowered cloth. I cover the basket and let it rest again. While it does, I turn on the radio. We have an old kitchen radio, a wooden one with a single round dial, and it gets the morning classical station better than anything new. I do not know what they play. I never know what they play. It is always something soft and patient, with a piano or a quiet string section, and I let it fill the kitchen like a second kind of warmth. The cat comes downstairs at this point, as she always does, drawn by the sound and the smell. She rubs against the leg of the table, walks slowly around my ankles, and then settles in a square of sun that has just started to crawl across the floor. She looks up at me once with her slow yellow eyes, as if to say, "Yes, this is a good Saturday so far," and then she closes them. When the dough has risen again, I turn on the oven. It is an old oven, the kind that takes its time, so I always let it preheat for a good while. I put a small cast iron pot in there to heat up too, because I bake the bread inside it. The pot belonged to my mother-in-law. It is heavy and dark and has a lid that fits perfectly, and it makes the crust come out crackly and brown. While the oven heats, I tidy a few more things. I rinse my teacup. I put the salt back on the shelf. I straighten the towel on the oven handle. None of it is necessary. None of it is rushed. It is just the small things you do in your own kitchen, in your own time, on a quiet Saturday morning when no one is asking anything of you. When the oven is finally hot enough, I tip the dough out of the basket, slash a soft cross into the top with a small sharp knife, and lower it gently into the hot pot. The lid goes on. The pot goes back in the oven. I close the door, set a timer, and step away. For the next 40 minutes, the kitchen slowly fills with the smell of baking bread. There is no smell quite like it. It is warm and a little sweet and a little nutty, and it makes the whole house feel safe. The cat lifts her head once to take note of it, then goes back to sleep. I sit at the table again with another small cup of tea and let the smell do its work. When the timer goes off, I take the pot out, take the lid off, and put the pot back in for another 10 minutes to brown the top. This is the part that always feels a little like watching a stage curtain about to rise. When I finally lift the loaf out and tip it onto a cooling rack, it is round and brown and beautifully imperfect, with a crackly top that sings to itself as it cools. I tap the bottom, and it sounds hollow, the way a good loaf should. I wait. That is the hardest part of bread, the waiting. You cannot cut into a fresh loaf right away or you will squash all its careful crumb. So I leave it on the rack and go water the rose bush. I take a slow walk around the garden. I pull a single dandelion out of the path because it has been bothering me for a week. I sit on the back step in the new sun for a few minutes and watch a small beetle make its long, slow walk across a flagstone. I let the loaf cool. Some time later, my neighbor knocks on the back door. She does this most Saturdays now. She knows the schedule. She has flour on her own hands, having made a small batch of biscuits at her own table, and she wants to swap. I cut her 2 thick slices of bread. She presses 2 warm biscuits into my palm. We stand on the step for a few minutes and talk about nothing much, the weather, her tomatoes, my rose bush, the way the cat has gotten lazy. Then she goes back through the gap in the hedge, and I stand on the step a moment longer, holding the warm biscuits in one hand and the screen of the door in the other, just looking at the light on the lawn. I take the rest of the bread inside, wrap it in a clean cloth, set it on the wooden board on the counter, and put the kettle on one more time. The morning is not over, but the work of it is done. The kitchen is warm. The cat is asleep in the sun. The radio is still playing something I will never know the name of. And outside, the day is moving on, slow and gentle, with no particular plans for me at all. I sit down at the table with one of the warm biscuits and a fresh cup of tea, and I look at the loaf on its board. And I think that this, right here, is one of the small good reasons to keep doing the same quiet thing every week. Our town has a small public library on the corner of two quiet streets, in a stone building that used to be a schoolhouse. It has tall, narrow windows, a green wooden door, and a small brass plaque next to the bell that I have never seen anyone actually ring. I have been a volunteer there twice a week for about 6 years now. Tuesday afternoons and Thursday evenings, every other Friday if Maureen is on holiday. It is not a real job, and I am not really a librarian. But the head librarian, a kind woman named Eileen, calls me her right hand, and I take that as a compliment. This particular evening, the one I am telling you about, it had been raining all day. Not a heavy rain. The soft, steady kind that does not really get you wet so much as it slowly soaks into everything. The kind of rain that beads on a wool coat and shines on the slate roofs and makes the whole town look like a photograph from a long time ago. I walked over to the library a little after 6, with my umbrella up and my soft wool scarf tucked into my collar. The streets were almost empty. The bakery on the corner had closed for the day, and the warm yellow light of the chip shop further down the road was just turning on. A few people walked dogs in raincoats. A cat watched me from a windowsill behind a screen of plants. I crossed the small green square in front of the library, where the rain was making perfect little rings in the standing water on the path, and I climbed the 3 worn stone steps and pushed open the green door. The library smells the way libraries should smell. Paper, old wood, a small breath of dust, and something a little like vanilla, which I have never been able to fully explain. The lights inside are soft. They are the kind of lights that do not insist on themselves. The main room has a long, polished counter, 2 reading tables with green shaded lamps, 3 rows of tall wooden shelves, and a small alcove near the back where the children's books live, with 2 beanbag chairs and a low table. Eileen was at the counter, sorting returns into neat stacks. She looked up and smiled when the doorbell jingled. "You picked a cozy night for it," she said. "I think I picked the right night," I said. I hung my coat on the hook in the small back room, set my umbrella in the bucket, and put on my soft cardigan from the hook beside the coat. There is no uniform, but I always wear the same cardigan. It belongs to the library, in my mind, more than to me. Eileen handed me a small list of things she wanted done that evening. Reshelve the returns, tidy the magazines, check that the children's alcove was set up for the morning story time. Make sure the umbrella stand by the door did not overflow. None of it was urgent. None of it ever was. I started with the returns. There were not many. A small pile of mysteries, a stack of cookbooks, a worn paperback of poems, 2 large books about birds, and a small book of folk tales for children with a deer on the cover. I pushed the trolley quietly along the aisles, sliding each book back into its place. The shelves have a particular order that I know by heart. I do not even have to read the spines anymore. My fingers know the spaces. As I shelved, I noticed a small scrap of paper sticking out of one of the cookbooks. I pulled it out, expecting a forgotten bookmark or a shopping list. It was a note, written in careful handwriting in soft pencil, that said only, "Tell Margaret about the apple cake on page 73. I stood there for a moment with the note, smiling. I did not know who the writer was or who Margaret was, but I imagined them both anyway. A friend who had borrowed the book and tasted something good. A friend named Margaret somewhere on the same street, with a kettle and a couple of bowls. I tucked the note inside the back cover, on the off chance that the next person might find it and pass on the recommendation. Then I slid the book home into its place. A man came in then, shaking the rain off his cap. He nodded to Eileen and to me the way our regulars do. He is a retired veterinarian, I think, although I have never asked, and he comes most Thursdays for the newspapers. He always reads them in the same chair, the one closest to the radiator with his glasses sliding down his nose. He hung his coat carefully, took the newspaper from the rack, settled into the chair, and was lost to us for the next hour. The only sound from his direction was the soft rustle of pages turning every few minutes. Mrs. Whitlock came in shortly after. She is a tiny woman in her 80s with white hair pinned back and a soft purple raincoat. She comes for the romance novels. She is never embarrassed about it. She always tells me exactly what she is looking for and is very specific. That evening she wanted, in her own words, something that does not have a war in it and where nobody dies in the end. I walked her over to the shelf I knew she would like, and we chose 2 books together. She thanked me with a small pat on my arm and made her way to the counter, where Eileen checked them out for her with the patient, slow stamping that Mrs. Whitlock prefers. The rain kept on outside. Through the tall windows, I could see the lamp on the corner glowing in a little misty halo. Somewhere on the slate roof, a drain pipe was singing a small, steady song. Inside the library, everything was warm. The radiator clicked softly. The desk lamps threw their green pools of light onto the tables. The smell of paper and old wood and a hint of someone's pencil eraser drifted around me as I worked. After a while, a small girl came in, holding the hand of her father. She was maybe 5 or 6, in a yellow raincoat that came down almost to her ankles, with bright pink rubber boots underneath. Her father shook out their shared umbrella and parked it by the door. The girl walked straight to the children's alcove without looking at any of us, with the focused expression of someone on a serious mission. I drifted that way in case I could help. She was kneeling by the lowest shelf, running her finger along the spines. After a moment, she looked up at me. "I am looking for the rabbit book," she said. "There are a lot of rabbit books," I said, kneeling beside her. "Do you remember anything else about it?" She thought hard for a moment, scrunching her nose. "It has a blue cover," she said, "and the rabbit has a green coat, and he is friends with a mouse, and the mouse wears a scarf." I knew the one she meant at once. It was one of my own favorites from the alcove, an old book by a quiet author whose name I always have to look up. I pulled it off the shelf and handed it to her. She held it in both hands and made a tiny, delighted sound, like a small puff of breath. Then she sat right down on the floor with it and started turning the pages, her father waiting patiently in the chair by the window, smiling. After they checked out their books and left, with the bell jingling softly behind them, the library settled back into its quiet rhythm. Eileen made us both tea in the back room. We sat on the 2 old chairs there with our mugs in our hands and did not say very much. She was knitting a long gray scarf for her grandson. I just listened to the rain. I went out to tidy the magazines after my tea. People are sweet about magazines, but not very tidy. I straightened the gardening monthlies, restacked the woodworking ones, smoothed the corners of the cooking pages. Someone had pulled out the crossword from the back of one of them. I slid the magazine into the stack anyway and made a small note for Eileen, who keeps a small private list of regulars who do things like that. She finds it more charming than annoying. I spent a little time in the children's alcove after that. There was a beanbag chair that had lost most of its stuffing on one side. I patted it back into a friendlier shape. A picture book about a small bear who learns to bake bread had slid behind the radiator. I rescued it gently and put it back on the shelf with a small apology to the bear. I straightened the basket of small, soft toys we keep for the youngest visitors, the worn rabbit and the slightly bald owl, and the sheep who has always been a bit grubby no matter how often Eileen washes him. They sat in their basket and looked very pleased to be sitting in it, the way small, soft toys do. A young man came in for the last hour. I had not seen him before. He had a small backpack and a damp paperback under his arm. He asked, very politely, if there was anywhere quiet he could read for a while. I pointed him to the long table near the back. He set up his book and a small notebook and a tin of mints, and he barely moved for the next 50 minutes. Every now and then, he would smile a little at the page. I felt very fond of him in a vague, kindly way, the way you do of strangers in libraries who are reading on a rainy night. I walked slowly down the aisles one more time, just to feel the shelves. Every library has a quiet personality, and ours has one I have grown into over the years like a soft old jumper. I straightened a few spines that had wandered. I pushed a stray cart back to its proper corner. I paused near the poetry section and pulled down a thin little book I had not read in a while, and I read one short poem standing there, slowly, just for me. The poem was about a man feeding bread to birds in the snow. It was very gentle and made no point at all. I slid the book back into its place and gave the spine a small tap with my finger, as if to thank it, and moved on. Toward the end of the evening, the regulars drifted out one by one. The retired veterinarian folded his newspaper, hung it back on the rack, tipped his cap to us, and slipped out into the rain. The young man closed his books, gathered his papers, and gave us a tired smile on his way out. Mrs. Whitlock had already left long ago, clutching her 2 romances under her purple raincoat. When the clock above the counter showed 5 minutes to 9, Eileen and I started the small closing rituals. I went around the reading lamps and clicked them off, one by one, leaving only the warm light over the counter. I checked the windows. I emptied the umbrella bucket, which had filled with a small lake of rainwater. I tidied the children's alcove, plumping the beanbag chairs and straightening the rabbit book back into its place on the lower shelf, with the friendly little green-coated rabbit smiling out at me. Eileen counted the days slips, locked them in the small drawer behind the counter, and turned the main switch. The big lights went down to a single small lamp. We put on our coats. I took my umbrella from the bucket. She set the alarm panel, the way she always does, with her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Then we stepped out into the soft rain, and she pulled the green door shut behind us. It made a small, satisfying sound. We said goodnight at the corner. She went one way and I went the other. The rain had eased to a slow drift. The street lamps cast long, warm reflections on the wet stones. I walked home with my umbrella up, but my coat unbuttoned at the throat, and I felt the way you feel after a good, gentle evening, full of small, calm things. By the time I turned my key in my own door, my house was waiting with one warm lamp left on. I shook out the umbrella, hung my coat, and went inside. The kettle was still warm from before. I poured myself a small cup of milk, sat in my chair by the window, and let the rain finish its slow night work outside while my eyes got heavier. My granddaughter is 7, and she has decided she wants to learn how to fish. This came up over a slice of birthday cake at her party in May, and once she had said it out loud, she did not let go of the idea. By June, her mother had asked if I might take her up to the old lake cabin one weekend for a quiet trial. I said yes before she had even finished the sentence. The lake cabin is not much. My father built it when I was a boy, with help from his brother and a great deal of patience. It is a single room with a tin roof, a wood stove, 2 narrow beds, a small kitchen counter with a cold tap, and a porch with 2 chairs that face the water. A long wooden dock runs out into the lake, gray and weathered and creaking when you step on it. The place has been gently fixed and refixed over the years, but the bones are still my father's bones. We drove up on a Friday afternoon. My granddaughter, whose name is Polly, sat in the back seat with a small backpack on her lap. She had packed it herself, and she informed me with great seriousness of its contents. 2 books, a flashlight, 3 drawings she had made for me, her stuffed rabbit, whose name is Henry, a spare pair of socks, a small bag of jelly sweets which she felt were essential. We drove the long, quiet road out of town, past the cornfields and the orchards and the small farm with the donkeys that she always insists we slow down for. We slowed for the donkeys. They looked back at us with their patient, faintly amused eyes. Then we drove on through the woods, where the road turned to packed dirt, and finally down the small lane to the cabin, where the trees opened up and the lake appeared like a sudden silver gift. Polly was out of the car before I had even pulled up the hand brake. She ran straight down the path, past the woodpile and the porch, to the end of the dock, where she stopped and just stared at the water with her hands at her sides. She did not say anything. I think she was understanding something. I let her have a moment, and then I called her back to help me unload the car. We carried in the small bag of groceries, the tackle box, the 2 old fishing rods that had been my father's and Polly's backpack. We opened the shutters. We put fresh sheets on the small beds. I lit a fire in the wood stove not because we needed the heat, but because the smell of the smoke is part of being there. Polly stood at the porch railing with Henry under her arm, watching the surface of the lake. For supper that evening, we kept it simple. Soup from a tin, fresh bread, sliced apples, a piece of cheese. Polly insisted on setting the table with the small enamel plates. She put Henry on his own chair. We ate slowly. The light over the lake softened and went gold, then pink, then a kind of dusty lilac. A loon called somewhere out across the water, that long, lonesome falling note, and Polly stopped chewing for a moment to listen. "Is that a wolf, Grandpa?" she asked, very quietly. "That is a loon," I said. "It is a kind of bird that lives on the lake. It is just saying hello to the evening." She accepted this with a small nod and went back to her bread. We were both in bed by 9. The cabin was full of the small sounds of a calm night, the soft hiss of the wood stove, the slow lap of water against the dock, the faint creak of a wooden wall settling. Polly fell asleep almost at once, with Henry tucked under her chin. I read for a little while by the light of the kerosene lamp, more out of habit than anything, and then I let the book fall closed on my chest and turned the lamp down low. The morning came in soft and pink. I was up first, as I always am, and I made coffee on the wood stove. The whole cabin smelled of coffee and wood smoke. I sat on the porch with my mug and watched the mist lift off the lake in slow, drifting sheets. The world was very still. Even the dock did not creak. A fish jumped somewhere out in the middle of the lake, just one small silver flick and a single ripple. The morning, in other words, was being itself. Polly came out in her pajamas with Henry under her arm, blinking, her hair sticking up at the back. She climbed into my lap without asking. We sat there for a long time, the two of us and Henry, watching the lake wake up. "Grandpa," she said eventually, "when can we fish?" "After breakfast," I said. "Fish do not like to be rushed. Neither do we." We had oatmeal with brown sugar and slices of apple. Polly took her time. Then we put on our wide-brimmed hats because the sun was already saying hello, and we walked down to the dock with the 2 rods and the tackle box and a small jar of bait. I sat her on the dock with her legs dangling over the side, the rod across her knees. I showed her, very slowly, how to hold the rod, how to let out the line, how to keep her finger on the spool so the line did not run away. We did not bother with hooks at first. We just practiced casting into the lake, watching the small bobber arc out and land with a soft plop in the water. She giggled the first few times. By the 10th, she was concentrating with her little brow furrowed. When we put a hook on, I did the baiting. Polly did not want to touch the bait. That was fine. She held the rod and made a fine, careful cast, and we sat there in the morning sun and waited. The lake glittered. A dragonfly the color of a piece of glass landed on the rail of the dock for a moment and then was gone. Across the water, a heron stood motionless in the reeds, like a careful gray statue. After what could have been a long time or a short time, the bobber dipped. Polly froze. I told her calmly to lift the tip of the rod a little and reel it in slow. Her tongue came out at the corner of her mouth. She turned the reel with great concentration. A small silver fish appeared out of the water, twisting and shining in the sun. Polly let out a single high, happy sound. I took the fish off the hook for her, showed her the bright stripes on its sides and the small flicking gills, and then we lowered it back into the water. It paused for a moment as if to consider us, then turned and slid away into the green. "He is going to tell his friends about us," Polly said. "I think he might," I said. We fished for the rest of the morning, and we caught 2 more small ones. Each one went back into the water with a small ceremony. By lunchtime, the sun was high and warm. We packed up the rods and walked back up to the cabin. We made cheese sandwiches and ate them on the dock with our feet in the cool water. Polly fell asleep on a folded towel after lunch with Henry under her cheek, and I sat in the porch chair and watched the lake do its slow afternoon thing. A small breeze came up after a while. It moved the surface of the lake in long, soft lines, like someone gently combing the hair of the water. The trees on the far shore made a low, steady whisper. I closed my eyes for a few minutes too. I did not really sleep. I just listened to the small lapping sounds at the dock and the wind in the pines, and the quiet breathing of the 7-year-old curled up nearby. Somewhere far across the water, a boat passed at a slow speed, and the sound of its little outboard came to us soft and friendly, like a person humming in another room. When Polly woke up, she rubbed her eyes, looked at the lake, and announced in a very official voice that she was a little bit hungry. We had crackers and apple slices on the porch. She fed half a cracker to a small chickadee that had been watching her from the railing. The bird took it with great seriousness, hopped to the railing post, ate it in 3 careful pecks, and looked at her with an expression that clearly meant another one would be appreciated. In the late afternoon, we went out in the rowing boat. I rowed very slowly while Polly trailed her hand in the water. We drifted around a little wooded island where the herons nest. We watched the herons stand and watch us back. We saw a turtle on a half-submerged log who looked at us with one eye and then gradually slipped, in his own time, into the water without a sound. We saw a school of small fish flicker under the surface like bits of broken silver. We saw the long, thin shape of a dragonfly skim across the boat, light on the gunwale for half a second, and skate off again. Polly was quiet for the whole row. She did not seem to feel any need to talk. She just trailed her hand in the cool water and looked at the lake, and now and then she looked at me with a small content smile, and we did not really need to say anything. We rowed home before the wind picked up. For supper, we cooked sausages over a small fire on the stone ring beside the cabin. The smoke curled up through the pine branches. Polly toasted bread on a long stick and was very proud of how brown she got it. We sat on a log and ate with our fingers, and afterwards we made hot chocolate on the wood stove and drank it on the porch while the sky went pink and then purple. While we drank our chocolate, a fox came out of the trees on the far side of the clearing. He was a small one, with a thin red tail and very neat black feet. He saw us, paused with one paw still raised, and stared at us for what felt like a long time but was probably about 10 seconds. Polly held very still. The fox decided we were not worth a fuss and trotted off along the edge of the clearing in his own private direction. Polly let out a long, slow breath. We did not even need to say anything about it. We just sat there feeling glad that the fox had walked through our evening. After he was gone, she leaned her head against my arm and watched the last bits of color leave the sky, and the first stars come out, very slowly, one at a time, the way they do when no one is hurrying them. When it was finally dark, we sat on the dock with a blanket around us both and looked up at the stars. There are a lot of stars over that lake, more than there ought to be. Polly counted them out loud for a while in twos until the counting ran together into a slow, soft murmur. I pointed out the few constellations I know. She added a few of her own invention. Henry the Rabbit, she informed me, was definitely up there too, just behind that bright one near the top. By the time we walked back up the path to the cabin, she was almost asleep on her feet. I tucked her into the small bed, tucked Henry in beside her, and turned the lamp down to its smallest yellow flicker. She murmured something about the fish, and then she was gone. I sat on the porch for a long while after that, listening to the lake and the small night sounds, and feeling the kind of full quiet that you do not really get to feel very often. The next morning we would go home, and she would tell her mother about the silver fish and the loon and the heron and the stars, and her mother would smile and say wonderful. But just then, it was only the lake and the dark trees and the slow, soft slap of water on the dock. After a while, I went inside, set my mug on the small wooden table, and lay down on my own narrow bed. The blanket was warm. The fire in the wood stove had settled to a quiet orange glow. I could hear Polly breathing softly across the room. I lay there for a while listening to all of it, and then I let my eyes close, and the cabin and the lake and the small breathing girl carried me gently down into sleep. A few years ago, my partner and I bought a small old farmhouse at the edge of a village we had been visiting for years. It was not in good shape when we got it. The roof had been patched in places, the kitchen floor sagged a little in one corner, and the front porch had reached the point where you could feel the boards thinking about giving up if you stepped on them in the wrong place. Most people who looked at the house had been put off by the porch. We had been charmed by everything else, and the porch felt like a project we could grow into. So we bought the house, and we made a list of things we wanted to fix, and the porch sat near the top of the list for almost 2 years before we got to it. The summer we finally did, we set aside a long, quiet weekend to begin, just the two of us with no real deadline. The plan was small: take up the worst of the old boards, replace them with new cedar, sand the railing, repaint the railing and the columns the same soft pale gray it had been when the house was first built, a color we had found preserved under 3 layers of newer paint by accident. We were not trying to make it look new. We were trying to make it look the way it had wanted to look all along. We drove down on Friday evening with the truck and a load of materials and not much else. The cab smelled of fresh cedar from the boards stacked in the bed, that good sharp clean smell, like a forest after rain. My partner drove. I had the window down and let the warm summer air pull through my hair. We arrived just before sunset. The house was sitting there at the end of the lane, the way it always is, patient and slightly tired and very pleased to see us, in that way old houses have. The front porch faced west, so the late sun was full on it. The old gray boards glowed a soft, warm color. The wisteria that had been climbing the corner column for who knows how many years was in bloom, with pale purple flowers hanging down in heavy, quiet bunches. We did not do any work that evening. We unloaded the materials onto a tarp, brought our small bags into the kitchen, and made supper. We had brought a roast chicken from the place we like in town, and we ate it cold on the back step with a loaf of bread and a jar of pickles, while the swallows did their evening looping over the field behind the house. After supper, we sat on the porch, in the old wicker chairs, and drank lemonade and looked at what we were about to do. The porch creaked under us in a friendly way. We did not say a great deal. We just sat. Saturday morning, we got up early. I made coffee on the kitchen stove and brought 2 mugs out to the porch. The day was already warm and quiet. There was dew on the wisteria and a small spider working on a careful web between 2 of the railing balusters. We had agreed to start by removing the worst boards. So after coffee, I fetched the pry bar from the truck, and my partner set up the saw on a pair of sawhorses on the lawn. We took our time. We always take our time. That is the only way I really know how to do anything anymore. The old boards came up easier than I expected. Some of them lifted with a single gentle pry. Others took a little persuasion. We saved the nails in a small tin can. We stacked the salvageable bits of old wood on a tarp at the side of the porch, just in case. The boards that were too far gone went into a small pile for the wood stove later in the year. Underneath, the joists were mostly in good shape. We had been a little worried about that. They had been built well, with good, thick old wood, and only 2 of them needed any work at all. I sistered those with new pieces, hammering slowly, the sound of each nail echoing across the lawn and into the woods beyond, where it would come back as a small, polite echo a moment later. By mid-morning, the sun was higher and the bees were properly busy in the wisteria. My partner had cut a stack of new cedar boards to length. We started laying them, one at a time, with small gaps between for drainage. The new wood smelled wonderful. The old porch began to look a little younger with every board. We did not rush. After every few boards, we stopped to stretch, drink water, lean on the railing, and look at the work. A neighbor came by around 11. She lives up the road and was walking her old beagle. She stopped at the gate and we waved her in. She admired the work from a polite distance. She told us about the porch as she remembered it from when she was a girl, when there used to be a swing on the end where the wisteria is now. We had not known about the swing. She said the family who lived there then used to sit on the swing in the evening and sing very quietly. We thanked her for telling us. She walked on with the beagle wheezing happily beside her. We stood there for a moment, looking at the spot where the swing must have been, and we both, without saying so, decided that we were probably going to put one back. It is funny how a small piece of someone else's memory can turn into a small piece of your own plans. We talked about the swing while we worked the next few boards. What kind of wood? How long the chains should be? Whether we would paint it the same soft gray or leave the wood bare. We did not decide anything in particular. We just let the idea sit there with us, the way a good idea will, while our hands kept doing their slow, careful work. We made lunch in the kitchen, sandwiches with sliced tomato from a stall at the side of the road and cold ginger beer from a glass bottle. We ate on the lawn, on an old blanket, in the shade of the big walnut tree. Afterward, we lay back on the blanket and just looked up at the leaves moving against the sky. My partner fell asleep for a few minutes. I watched a small white butterfly drift slowly across the lawn and into the rose bushes. The world felt very wide and very gentle. In the afternoon, we sanded the railing. This is the slow part, the kind of work that does not have any drama to it. You move the sandpaper one slow stroke at a time, and you watch the layers of old paint give way under your hand. You uncover small bits of history. A little smear of bright green paint someone tried decades ago and gave up on. A patch of bare wood worn smooth by 1,000 hands resting on it. A small initial scratched into one of the balusters, just 2 letters, very neat, with no second guessing. We left the initials. They had been there longer than us. The afternoon got hot. We took breaks in the shade. We drank cold water from the kitchen tap. My partner went and lay down on the cool tile in the hallway for a few minutes, because that is the kind of thing you can do in an old farmhouse on a quiet afternoon. I sat on the front step and watched a robin pull a worm out of the lawn with a long, patient tug. The work waited for us when we came back to it, the way porch work always does. By late afternoon, the railing was bare wood, smooth and pale and ready. We brushed it down with a soft cloth and a little tack rag, and then we opened the can of pale gray paint, the soft color the porch had been once before. The paint went on slowly, in long, careful strokes. My partner did the spindles. I did the long top rail. We worked quietly. The sun started to slip behind the row of poplars on the western edge of the field, and the light went warm and golden, and the wet paint shone softly in it. We finished the railing as the sun went down. We did not paint the columns that day. We saved them for Sunday. We washed the brushes in the laundry sink, hung them on the wire above the sink to dry, and stepped back out onto the lawn. The porch already looked different. The new floor was pale and clean. The fresh paint on the railing was the right, quiet color. The wisteria was still doing what it had been doing for 60 years. For supper that night, we walked into the village, because we did not feel like cooking, and because the small inn at the corner does a very good pie. We ate at a table by the open door, with the warm evening drifting in. There was a small group of older men at a table by the fireplace, playing a long, slow card game with cards so worn the corners had gone soft. The innkeeper brought us second cups of tea without asking. We walked home slowly, in the dark, under the trees that line the lane, holding hands and not talking much. The village was very quiet. A single lit window on every other house, a single porch light here and there, and the smell of cut grass and wood smoke in someone's late roses. We walked past the small stone church at the bend in the lane and watched the bell tower against the dark sky for a moment before walking on. When we got back, we sat on the porch one more time, very carefully, in the wicker chairs. We did not lean too hard on the new paint. We listened to the crickets, who were busy. A small bat flew past, twice, and was gone. We sat there until the stars came out, and then we sat there a little longer just because we did not want to go in yet. Sunday morning, we painted the columns. That was simpler. I made another pot of coffee on the stove, and we sat with our mugs on the back step for a while before we started, because it seemed a shame to rush the morning. The light came in over the field in long, warm bars. A pair of mourning doves walked side by side along the fence rail, doing whatever it is morning doves do when they are being practical. We finished our coffee, washed our mugs, and went around to the front porch. The columns took most of the morning. We worked from top to bottom on each one, slow and even, with the brush held the way my father once showed me to hold a brush, lightly and patiently. The pale gray paint was so close in tone to the old stone of the foundation that the columns seemed to grow up out of the house itself. We stopped now and then to step back, squint, and check the work. We agreed twice that it looked very good and once that it looked very pleasant, which is a higher word in our small private vocabulary. By lunchtime, the porch was done. We stood out on the lawn and looked at it. The house, which had felt a little tired when we arrived, now looked the way it had been meant to look all along, like an old friend who had finally had a good night's sleep. We packed up the truck slowly. We left the new wood scraps stacked neatly under the back porch for some future small project. We swept the floor of the front porch one more time, just to enjoy the sound of the broom on the new boards. We sat on the porch step for a few minutes before we got in the truck. The wisteria moved a little in the warm breeze. The bees were still doing their slow, steady work. A breeze came through the screen door of the kitchen behind us and brought the smell of the old wood inside with it. Then we locked the door and drove home, and we already knew we would be back the next weekend, and the next, and that the porch was only the first of many small, slow things we would do to this house over the years. And that the work would not be a chore. It would be a kind of quiet conversation we were having with the house, and with each other, and with the long, slow summer that was still very much in front of us.